30 months of planning, it was hard to believe that the time had come. And December 1996, probably one of the most extensively prepared radio operations ever, was ready to take off. We assembled on Reunion Island, from where the French Antarctic Division would take us by boat via Crozet to Heard. The ship would continue to Amsterdam and return to pick us up 2 weeks later, taking us back via Kerguelen to Reunion Island. At least that was the plan. Reunion, Île Intense, as the French call it, the intense island, is a tropical paradise in the Indian Ocean. But as the team arrived, there was little time to enjoy this paradise. We rented 2 vans to transport people and personal luggage. Our cargo had arrived from California, Australia and Europe. With the help of the local hams, custom formalities were run through and all cargo was checked. We also run in all the generators and recrated them. Extra supplies were ordered. Oranges, lemons, potatoes, onions, 1,200 cans of soda, more lumber needed to secure the tents, oil for the generators and so on. Meanwhile, we were eager to get on the air with Tango Oscar Zero Romeo, our Reunion call sign, as the need for 160, RTTY and the walk bands was high. The setup for our 160-meter operation was most challenging. With the vertical standing in the Indian Ocean, the team operated from an open shelter on the beach, using a generator lent to us by the Reunion hams. On December 30th, our ship arrived. The Marion Dufresne measures 120 by 20 meters and is especially built for oceanographic research and to take cargo, fuel and passengers to the French islands in the Antarctic. All cargo was loaded on board. It was the first time most team members saw all our material collected from different parts in the world. We had roughly 20 tons of equipment, 6,000 liters of fuel, 3,000 liters of water, 2 tons of food, 500 liters of mineral water, and 15 bottles of propane.
Well, we've arrived here on the Marion Dufresne about an hour ago. The entire team is here. The last one to arrive was Harry, who arrived at 11 o'clock this morning. And so it looks like we have all of the gear and all of the team on board. So this is quite a significant a point for us, quite a significant time, and we're quite excited.
After about 2.5 years of preparation, I think we're about to roll on this expedition that many people said was not possible. 20 people, $320,000 cash, close to 30 tons of equipment. I think we're going to do it. I feel like I'm doing an expedition this year.
We had a bad start. Our departure was delayed by 2 days due to a strike. The only solution was to reroute the ship, skip Crozet, and sail directly to Heard Island. The team took advantage of the extra 2 days to make sure that all people knew every single bit of the cargo. The core of the operation consisted of two things: the ZAR system and the operating manual. The ZARs are team members responsible for one particular aspect of the operation.
Just plopping one of these bottles there.
The ZARs had written down the main guidelines for that part of the operation they were responsible for. KK6EK had combined all of this into an operating manual of 150 pages, which would form the backbone of the expedition. And finally, on January 5th, at 1600 local time, we started our voyage. Time had come to wave goodbye to our friends on Reunion, who had been so helpful, and to head for Herd.
This has been, the last 2 years have been an emotional roller coaster for me. We've been at extremely high levels of energy and activity, and we've been at the depths of despair. And now we're finally leaving the harbor, and while I'm extremely excited about it, I feel a great sense of relief, but my emotions after what they've been through are really a bit numbed, and I think it will be setting foot on Herd Island that finally triggers the feeling in my gut as to what is really happening and what's really about to take place with this expedition. It's extremely good to be underway, but setting foot on Herd Island will be the coup de grace. We will have done it when we arrive. I'm really impressed with the way this team has come together, functioned as a unit. We have 20 people from 10 countries, and in the last 4 days we've spent together on Reunion Island, everyone has fallen into place. They've done their part. We're working as a team. We've got a well-oiled machine here.
The Lama helicopter joined us an hour after we left port. The chopper looked rather small, but is made to lift up to 1 ton of cargo. The pilot, nicknamed Tonton, or Uncle, and Pascal, the mechanic, were to be the key people during the landing. Once the first shivers of leaving port were over, it was full speed ahead for the team. Still a lot of work to be done. This was the time the ZARs were preparing for action, each in the field they were responsible for. The ship's crew was obviously very involved in our operation as well. They stressed that the time needed to land should be kept as short as possible.
Safety would have to be one of our biggest concerns. If you can think about what we're up against, we've got 20 people coming in from all over the world to work together, to act together in an environment which would have to be one of the most hostile environments. We've got sub-zero temperatures, we've got other hazards, we've got environmental hazards, and to add on top of that, we're taking in petrols, oils, lubricants, all sorts of things which are potentially going to cause a tremendous hazard. And part of what I have to do is to identify these hazards and let the team know what they are, and more importantly, put some plans together so that we will be minimising our risks for some sort of disaster on Herd.
Well, my biggest problem would probably be to set up the galley tent and to have all stuff in that tent before we have any danger from the weather, from the wind, from the rain. And I think I feel a big responsibility to do that and to make everybody happy. The whole stuff weighs 25 tons, and only 2 tons of this stuff is is for food. And I can tell you we have 700 liters mineral water, we have 500 liters UHT milk, and additionally we have 500 liters orange juice and many other things. So we're going to survive there easily for 2 or 3 months.
What I'm doing here is just putting the finishing touches on our CT, our logging program configuration. I've been working on this for a year, trying to get it ready, and now we're just about to land, and I'm just actually doing the final stuff and trying to get it perfect so when we take it in there it'll work. When we land, I'm responsible for the organization for putting up the shelters, and so I've been talking to everybody and trying to collect everything, make sure everything we need are in the first boxes that are going ashore, everything we need for constructing the shelters. And it's sort of scary. I guess my fear is that we'll get there and we'll be missing one screwdriver or one rope or one silly something that's going to delay putting the shelters up by 3 or 4 hours until that thing comes over from the ship. Hope that doesn't happen.
To save precious landing time, all cargo was recrated according to landing priority. We also pre-assembled the floors of the shelters.
Well, first of all, I think we are perfectly prepared and perfectly poised and perfectly timed. We're not ready to do it this minute. We will be in 2 days after we've had a chance to rest. So I think the timing is perfect and our preparation is perfect. When we actually land, my biggest fear will be a sudden change in the weather that will prevent the flights of the helicopter or will interrupt them. That will change our sequencing and change our timing. It may introduce a factor that will require us to change plans on the spot. We've done a lot of thinking ahead of time of the what-ifs, but there may be some what-ifs that we haven't thought through. So that's probably my biggest fear.
As time went by, the first signs of the Antarctic were showing. The weather got much colder and the first albatrosses were sighted. This was the time to stage all cargo and to weigh each crate to make sure the helicopter could lift it. The tension was rising as everyone was packing their personal gear. We were almost there.
Always when I've dreamt about Heard Island for the past 2.5 years, 3 years, I've always seen the landing very dark, you know, like black, like you close your eyes and try to get you feeling black. I've always thought that Heard Island, the whole expedition will be very difficult physically, will be very demanding, will be battle against nature, and the landing will, as I feel it, be no exception to that. I hope I'm wrong. I definitely hope my feelings are wrong, but I think we're going to have a pretty rough landing.
We spotted Heard Island on January 11th, close to sunset. We had arrived. The ship anchored off Atlas Cove, our operating site to be, and a decision was made to land Bob, Ralph, James and Peter to do a first reconnaissance flight to the island to locate the operating sites. The helicopter ride from the ship to the island took just under a minute, and before we knew it, the Heard expedition set their first footprints on the island. The looks of the island were not very friendly. It was cold, wet and windy. There were two main colors, white from the sky and the glaciers, and black from the volcanic sand and rocks. The rocks were the main obstacles to set up camp, as the shelter floors needed flat ground. The site for the main tent was marked, but we found no suitable place to put up the two operating sites. Back on the ship, we all sat together and decided to change the plan a little. We would locate one of the operating sites within the main camp and put the other 2 operating sites further away, each separated by about 1,000 feet. The next day, we started landing at 4 o'clock in the morning. It rained slightly, and the wind picked up in speed as the helicopter took off. All cargo was landed in a predetermined sequence. The shelters and emergency rations first, tools, a generator and some people came next. The wind started blowing harder and harder, and it almost looked like the fear for a change in the weather was to come true. And it almost went wrong, as one of the shelter floors broke loose during transportation, but thanks to the skills of Tonton, it was saved. The 50 helicopter flights needed to land the 34 tons of cargo took 5 hours. In this time, the team erected the first shelters. They would ensure basic safety, as the ship would take off soon after the landing was completed. It looked almost like a military operation. Everyone knew exactly what to do and how to go about it. As the ship sailed away, we took a break, almost in silence. After the 5 tents of the main camp were set up, the first generators were started and we put the beacon on the air. This was the first time VK0IR was heard.
48 noon, Zulu.
Through the Inmarsat telephone, we kept in contact with the ship. The next day, we set up the shelters of the 2 other operating sites, as well as the main antennas. We had agreed not to come on the air until all was installed. We would hit the bands with 4 HF stations and amateur satellite at the same time. On January 14th, we were ready for our first QSO. And who else but our pilot coordinator could be the best candidate for the first contact?
Hi, John. This is Peter. John, we're ready to go in the air. Yeah, no, nothing to add. We're ready with 4 stations. We're gonna try to get some about 2 more on the air later today.
ON4UN, ON4UN, ON4UN. This is VK0IR, Victor Kilowatt 0, Italy Radio. John, are you there? ON4UN, you're 5 and 9 on Herd Island. Great to hear you, John. This is K0IR at the mic.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much, Rob. My honor.
Okay, John, very good to hear you. You're 5'9" Herd Island, and believe me, it's a pleasure to hear your voice on 20 meters. 73, my friend, and we'll be back with the pile-up in a few minutes. Have a good day. We're having a fine one here on Herd Island.
Good luck.
7-3, John. We'll catch you later.
All right!
After a short team meeting, we were ready for the first pile-ups. In the CW tent, all was quiet, but in the headset, it was not.
Victoria again, please.
With the SSB guys in Op 2, the operating site 2,000 feet away on the ridge, it wasn't much quieter.
Oscar Kilo 1 Alpha Delta 59. 73 VK0IR.
This is VK0IR,
Okay, Luca Mike 0, Florida Lima, Yankee 5 and 7, you're 5 and 9, Crystal. VK0IR, listening for an aftershock Mike station, please.
Just incredible! Just incredible! All this air traffic! Never seen this before in my life. This used to be a quiet place, but I mean, look at this now. Those radio waves are all over my island. Incredible! Incredible!
All stations used bandpass filters, and the Aggies were set out in such a way that they beamed parallel to the main directions to increase side rejection and reduce interference. This made it possible to run RTTY, CW and SSB on the same band at the same time. A VHF link between the three operating tents was used to make sure no single band opening was missed.
Okay, I'm going to try 15 cyber, but I don't get much reply. When was the last reply, or what are we running on 15?
Well, when we arrived, the antenna work that lay ahead of us was almost overwhelming. We had, I think, 47 antennas, something like that, in our hardware. We set about assembling them, and fortunately we had extremely good weather when we landed. Without that, we would have been in serious trouble. But we did manage to get almost all of our antennas up on the first go-around, including the Heard Island Special, the Foursquare, which Glenn W0GJ brought along for us to use. After completing this, we found that they all worked. They performed as we expected. We didn't dare put them up too high because of the winds, but we got them up to satisfactory height. We got them on the air, and then we began our Phase 2 antenna assembly, putting up some of the auxiliary antennas which we had brought along.
The Foursquare, the 4 vertical arrays, have outperformed every antenna that we've had here. The 40 meter is just really impressive. You can be working Europe and point it to Japan, and Europe goes away and Japan booms in, and you can just switch all over the world, and it's very directive, and something I've always wanted to do. We have a Foursquare up on 80 meters down the beach. It's the Gladiator verticals, and they've actually withstood a hurricane force wind without falling over, and that works as well as the 40 meter Foursquare. It's we can point it to Europe and point it to JA, and it's just amazing, the front to back and front to side, that that antenna has.
We've got about 350 QSOs in the log on 160 right now, and about 700 or 800 on 80 meters, so it's beginning to work. We got the Battle Creek Special up first thing on the second day, and then the first night that we operated, we did manage to make 14 North American QSOs. The next 2 nights, nothing heard. We were heard, but we didn't hear anybody. Last night, which would have been our 4th night on the band, we put another 8 or 10 North Americans in the log, and I'm very optimistic that as we move forward and we get a little bit better at this, there's going to be a lot more folks, stateside folks, in our 160 log. The other challenge is up the hill in the sideband tent. We yesterday erected the ON4UN specially designed 80 meter, or I should say 75 meter antenna, and got about halfway up and it collapsed and went back down, fell in the wind. We re-engineered it, put it back up, operated last night, made about 250 Qs on 75 phone.
For the low bands, an additional Foursquare for 160 was installed, and beverages were set up beaming to the main continents.
The problem that most expeditions have is to know where there is propagation on what band to what continent. I mean, I'm not talking about the mainstream pileups, but also very much the higher bands.
how we solved this is we did really extensive propagation forecasting, and we wrote this down on the sheet behind me so that everyone can see it. Then, the moment we landed on the island, one of the first things we did is put the beacon on the air. So people had like about 3 days to watch for the beacon on the higher bands before we actually got on the air. That feedback we got back from the pilots through PACSAT, radio amateur satellite. So the observations we put on the second chart behind me versus propagation predictions. And then as we are running now, people give us more and more feedback about we heard you on this band and that band, long path, from what continent. So we keep on logging that. So every day I'm making these schedules for the radio operators on who I want, on what band, looking for what openings, based on the feedback from the pilots, which everything goes via PACSAT. So we are sure we have the right operator on the right band at the right time, working the right continent. And that is, I think, very, very important for an expedition. All of our feedback from the pilots who monitor our operation and the releases, the press releases from this expedition go via PACSAT, the radio amateur satellite. ARI PA3DU did really very well in preparing that with auto-tracking antennas and whatever. It worked very well until the first day we got on the air with HF, and probably through HF interference, HF feedback into the PACSAT station. Something blew up, and they turned the rig inside out and whatever. The only thing they could come up with is if they put the radio outside in the cold before operating, then it works. So what Harry is doing right now is he's packing in the radio into a plastic bag and putting it outside under a cover. And then the moment he has a PACSAT opening, he rushes outside, gets the radio, gets it on the air, and then do his thing on PACSAT and puts it back into the heat, into the cold in the outside. It's really very funny to see him running in and out of the tent. It's really very funny.
PACSAT was not only used for the feedback to and from the pilot stations, but also to upload our logs and digital pictures which Ari made during the expedition. Everyone who had contacted us could, within about 24 hours after his contact with the expedition, verify for himself if he was in the log. The log servers were accessible via internet email and the web, as well as via packet radio. We had 5 heavy-duty generators, good enough for over 30 kilowatts of power. Gas barrels were transported with our tractor between the sides. We set up shifts for operating radio, as well as for camp maintenance, cleaning and cooking.
Best eatery in Heard Island. No one's going to believe this. Nu.
I've really had a good time here on Heard Island so far. We're about 40% of our way through the stay here, and I know that on the ship for a whole week I was just sick. I was in bed, I was flat, I was worthless, couldn't do anything. And I was so happy to land here. It's been so good. And I can't wait to get home because after the ship. But it's been really neat here. I've really enjoyed, this is a fascinating place. I read the book while I was here, 14 Men, about the initial Inari station guys in 1947 that set up camp here. And I think if I would have read that book before I came here, I probably wouldn't have come.
When we arrived on the island and we stepped off of that helicopter, a thought went through my mind, what have we gotten ourselves into? We were in a dark place, a dreary place, a wet place, a place that had far more rock and rough terrain than I had anticipated. And due to the light situation, the noise of the helicopter, the seals barking in the background, it was like landing on another world. Fortunately, that perception has changed a little bit. We've tamed the island a bit, we've got our shelters up. We occasionally get nice light and good weather and can see the natural beauty of the place. But it was a real shock stepping off that first helicopter.
I want to comment just a little bit on this place. My emotions range from what a godforsaken hole this is, and that's the way I feel most of the time when it's overcast and dreary and foggy and rainy and cold and windy. But on those 2 nice days that we've had, I've looked around, I've seen those glaciers. There's about 3 or 4 glaciers that are visible from here. There's 2 volcanoes visible from here. And I look at those in the bright sunlight and I'd say, gosh, what a beautiful place. So my emotions are going from one extreme to the other. Most of the time, it's an ugly place. The good news is it's not as cold as I had expected it to be, but it is as rainy, it is as windy.
Big Ben, towering 9,000 feet above us, occasionally showed its top and reminded us how small we were, and how temporary our visit was, compared to the 14 men that put up the Inari base exactly 50 years ago. One of the Inari shelters was of particular interest to us, as it was used during the 1983 ham expedition and was still intact, sheltering the island's emergency rations. In the evening sun, the island didn't look that bad. But unfortunately, good weather was an exception. Most of the time, the wind was blowing, peaking over 80 miles per hour at up 2 on the ridge. Temperature was normally around freezing point, with the chill factor down at minus 20 degrees centigrade. But when the going gets rough, the rough get going. And when an antenna goes down, the operator set about to repair it, wind or no wind. It looked as if Johnny, the lesser cheat bill who frequented our camp, was reminding the operators, get up, because storm or no storm, the radio schedule was to be respected. DX never rests, nor do the pileups.
Hey, it's your shift, guy. Hi. It's your shift. Well, how are you? Oh, here you are. Where's my shift? It's your shift. Look. Look at the planes here. See it? There. Where's my shift? Go.
Me and my second operator are gonna do 160 tonight.
Victor Echo 6, Whiskey Quebec. Victor Echo 6, Whiskey Quebec. You 5 and 9. 5 and 9, Roger. 73, QRZ, listening 3810. November Bravo, 7 November. November Bravo, 7 November. You 5 at...
All logging was done with CT, and 6EK spent 3 hours per day checking the logs and making sure that the band and mode changes were correctly logged and matched those on the paper notes. After the logs were approved, they were compressed and sent via PACSET to the servers. All too soon, we had to prepare for departure on January 28. After logging just over 80,000 QSOs, it was time for the last one, with our chief pilot, ON4UN.
Thank you very much, John, for all that you've done. It's hard to know how to mark this moment, if it's the end or if it's really very early in a new beginning. 73, John, thank you very much for all you've done. This is VK0IR, now QRT. 73, John, and thank you all.
Okay, very good, Rob. Nice to say hello to Rob. You guys did a terrific job. You guys did a terrific job.
From now on, we were all preparing for a fast departure. The weather was not cooperative. In a 50 miles per hour wind, we took down most antennas and all but 2 shelters, awaiting for the ship to arrive.
Attends avec grande impatience. Et tu me donnes un signal si tu vas démarrer avec l'hélico. QSL?
On January 28, we picked up the VHF signal from the Marion du Fresne. And the first part of the evacuation started immediately, late that evening. despite the high winds. The maneuver started again the next day. 51 flights would be needed to take everything off the island. Shit no go, we no go, is the tradition from Peter I, so we left nothing but our footprints. With the last helicopter landing on the deck, we knew we had done it. All people and the cargo safely back on the ship. The expedition was over.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, so good. It's so sweet.
ci diggante marak manse bi julu li suuf sedde ci lañ gaawantu fatu mi ngi doon garañ ni bi jolol yu teddi ci melax yi xawe laax yeneen yu mel ni lu doon riir ngir liberté di riir ngir jàmbaar yi doon xeex te bal tàkkul di riir ngir ñi doon gàddaay ci yoon yu metti ak ngir képp koo xam ni soldaar nga bu tumuranke ci guddi gi and against the bomb the times of freedom flashing ci benn mbar ci dëkk bi ñi ngi làqatu woon di xool li nga xamante ni mbir yaa ngi doon wàññeeku bi jolol yu nekk ci xew di riir ci taw bi ngelaw ngir jolol yu leer nekk ci kawam di tàbbi di riir ngir ki bañ di yëngu ngir ki loof di yëngu ki ñi ñàkk chance ñi ñu fàtte ñi ñu woor di yëngu ngir ñi ñu beddi yàgg ku làkk muy dundee and we gave upon the chance of freedom passion Su église yi san mu sore sore ak ngelaw li desetul nga di wax ngir say-say bi